The rain hammered against Elena Rodriguez's windshield as she navigated her gleaming silver Mercedes through the treacherous curves of Highway 101. As one of Silicon Valley's most successful tech executives, she was accustomed to pressure, but tonight felt different. The emergency board meeting had run late, and now she was racing against time to catch the last flight to New York, where her daughter's Broadway debut awaited. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, missed calls from her assistant, her daughter, and the airline. Elena's perfectly manicured fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as she pressed the accelerator, her Louboutin heels gleaming even in the dim light of her car's interior. Success had always come at a price, and tonight that price felt heavier than ever. Through the torrential downpour, Elena spotted something that made her heart skip a beat. On the shoulder of the highway, barely visible through the sheets of rain, stood a figure hunched over what appeared to be a broken-down vehicle. Most drivers sped past without a second glance, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene before disappearing into the darkness. Elena's first instinct was to continue driving. She had a plane to catch, a daughter counting on her, and a reputation for never missing important commitments. But something deep within her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years of corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, made her foot ease off the accelerator. The figure by the roadside was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, standing beside an ancient pickup truck with its hood raised. His thin frame shook visibly in the cold rain, and his worn jacket offered little protection against the elements. Elena noticed his hands trembling as he attempted to peer into the engine, clearly out of his depth with the mechanical problem. Elena pulled over, her luxury vehicle a stark contrast to the man's weathered truck. She sat for a moment, rain drumming against her roof, and noticed her reflection in the rear-view mirror. Her diamond earrings catching the light, her silk blouse still perfectly pressed despite the long day. When was the last time she had stopped to help someone? When had she last allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be human? She stepped out into the rain, immediately feeling her designer clothing become soaked. "Are you all right?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. The man looked up, surprise evident in his weathered face. His name was Frank, and as Elena approached, she could see the gratitude mixed with embarrassment in his eyes. "Oh, miss, you shouldn't stop in this weather. It's not safe for someone like you." Elena smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. "Someone like me needs to stop more often," she replied, pulling out her phone. "Let me call for help." But Frank shook his head, water dripping from his gray hair. "I already tried calling my son, but there's no signal out here. And I can't afford a tow truck right now." His voice cracked slightly with the admission. As they stood there in the rain, Frank began to share his story. He was rushing to the hospital, where his wife of 52 years lay in critical condition after a heart attack. He had been by her side for 3 days straight, and had only left to go home and shower when the nurses insisted. Now his truck had broken down, and he was stranded 20 miles from the hospital with no way to get back to Margaret, the love of his life. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Here was a man who had spent decades building a life based on love, while she had spent years building an empire based on ambition. His worn hands told stories of hard work and sacrifice, while her manicured ones had signed deals worth millions, but had rarely touched another human being with genuine compassion. Without hesitation, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives. "Get in my car," she said firmly. "I'm taking you to the hospital." Frank protested, insisting he couldn't impose, especially on someone who was clearly successful and busy. But Elena was already moving, helping him gather his belongings from the truck. As they settled into her Mercedes, she noticed how out of place Frank looked among the leather seats and high-tech dashboard. But she also noticed something else. The car felt more alive with him in it. During the drive to the hospital, Elena learned about Frank's life. He had been a mechanic for 40 years, working honest jobs to provide for his family. He spoke about Margaret with such tenderness that Elena found herself fighting back tears. When had someone last spoken about her with such love? When had she last prioritized love over success? Frank, meanwhile, was amazed by Elena's kindness. "You know," he said softly, "Margaret always told me that angels come in all forms. I never expected one to wear such fancy shoes." They both laughed. And Elena realized it was the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. When they arrived at the hospital, Elena insisted on coming inside. She watched as Frank rushed to Margaret's bedside, his face transforming with relief and love. Margaret was stable but weak, and when Frank took her hand and told her about the angel who had rescued him, Elena felt her heart swell with an emotion she had almost forgotten existed. Margaret insisted on meeting Elena, and when their eyes met, the elderly woman squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for bringing him back to me," she whispered. "You have a beautiful heart." Elena stayed at the hospital longer than she intended, helping Frank with paperwork and ensuring Margaret had everything she needed. Her phone continued to buzz with missed calls and messages, but for the first time in years, she ignored them. She missed her flight, missed her daughter's opening night, but she was exactly where she needed to be. 3 weeks later, Elena received a handwritten letter from Frank and Margaret. Margaret had made a full recovery, and they were eternally grateful for Elena's kindness. But the real transformation had happened within Elena herself. That night on the highway had reminded her that success without compassion was merely an empty achievement. Elena began volunteering at local shelters, using her resources and influence to help others, rather than just accumulate wealth. She rebuilt her relationship with her daughter, prioritizing presence over presence. She learned that true luxury wasn't found in designer clothes or expensive cars, but in the connections we make with other human beings. 6 months later, Elena returned to that same stretch of Highway 101. She had established a roadside assistance program for low-income families, ensuring that no one would be stranded like Frank had been. As she drove past the spot where she had first seen him, she smiled, remembering how a single act of kindness had saved not one life, but 2. The rain that night had washed away more than just the dust from the highway. It had washed away Elena's coldness, revealing the warm, compassionate heart that had always existed beneath her polished exterior. Sometimes, the most glamorous thing we can wear is our humanity, and the most successful thing we can do is simply care for one another. Frank and Margaret sent Elena a Christmas card that year with a simple message: "To our highway angel, thank you for showing us that kindness is never out of style." Elena kept that card on her desk. A daily reminder that in a world racing toward individual success, the most powerful thing we can do is slow down and help each other along the journey. Like and subscribe for more videos.